Welcome to Breakfast at Beverley's, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the fascinating world of transport and logistics. Join your host, Beverley Bell CBE, an industry expert and former senior traffic commissioner, as she navigates the highways and byways of the industry. From sunrise to sunset, we're here to accompany you on the road, bringing you insights, advice, and thought-provoking conversations with notable guests in the field. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Well, Steve, welcome, and thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Usual question, what have you had for breakfast today?
Hi Beverley, thank you very much indeed for inviting me. I must admit I'm in a slightly awkward position because it's normally me asking the question, so we're talking about my least favourite subject, which is me, but I can tell you what I had for breakfast. Thank you very much indeed for a very nice breakfast. I had eggs royale, which for anybody who doesn't know is poached eggs with some smoked salmon and a lovely hollandaise sauce, so it was very enjoyable, thank you.
That's a pleasure. And obviously we've been out for breakfast. When you're at home, what's your normal breakfast fare, and do you have a morning exercise routine?
Morning exercise routine is getting out of bed and taking lots of painkillers, because at the moment I had a knee replacement 4 months ago and I'm still suffering. So that is my exercise routine, is getting walking. I'm a bit boring with breakfast. Weekdays I have muesli in the summer, porridge in the winter, and at weekends, most weekends I still have a fry. I do love a good fry.
Oh, who doesn't?
I know, it's one of my many weaknesses.
Well, I won't ask you about all of your weaknesses, seeing as you don't want to talk about yourself. And do you think liking a fry-up is part of your northern roots?
Definitely, 100%. Fry-up on a Sunday morning, followed by a late Sunday lunch, always a roast. It's part of my Sunday routine, which I was brought up with by my lovely late grandma.
And I suppose we should say that you are a Yorkshireman, which I didn't know until this morning.
Well, I'm quite mortified that you couldn't tell. I've been down south 40 odd years, so I guess I've lost the accent to a certain extent. I still say glass and bath, which normally gives it away. But yeah, you can't keep talking like, a Yorkshireman when you're down south, because nobody's going to understand you. If I came across as Fred Truman, you'd be like, what? Excuse me? Every time. So yeah, my accent has modified slightly over the years, but I still don't put excess R's into words with A in.
So you work in, well, I say Bath, but I'm a Lancastrian, and it was too late to cancel it when I realised you were a Yorkshireman this morning. But you work in media. What do you think about people who say I have to ditch the northern accent if I want to work in media, although the other people who say I'm really proud of my northern accent, I'm just going to be myself?
I guess it depends what media. I mean, the BBC went through a phase where you had to, have received pronunciation to work on the BBC radio or TV. These days, that is not true. You do hear some dreadful regional accents, in my view, which are barely understandable on the BBC. When it comes to print media, it doesn't matter where you're from or how you speak. It's more about how you treat people and how you come across rather than how you talk. It's very important to empathise with people and get them to open up. So it doesn't matter how you talk, as long as you talk in a friendly, respectful way. Okay,
so we'll come back to print media in a little while. I want to go back to when you were young, as in school age. Tell us a little bit about your background, because, as I said in the introduction, lots of people will know the name but won't necessarily know the man behind the news. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I was brought up in a small village in West Yorkshire, near Huddersfield, a village called Meltham. Its only semi-claim to fame is it's near Holmfirth, which is where Last of the Summer Wine, I believe, is still going. God, that's hard to believe. Small village. Typical small village atmosphere. Everyone knew who you were and what you got up to. Found it quite claustrophobic. So that leads me on, in a way, to my next stage, is when I joined the Merchant Navy, to get away from this small town atmosphere and go and explore the world a little bit.
So tell us how you joined the Merchant Navy. Did you want to join anything else before you joined the Merchant Navy, Steve?
Yes, Beverley. As you know, I applied for the Royal Navy when I was 16 and was rejected, which actually was probably the best thing ever happened to me, because I think part of the reason I was rejected because it's quite clear I couldn't follow rules, and my interview was a complete shambles. So they did me a favour by turning me away, because I don't think I would have made a very good Royal Navy officer. So that was at 16. I'd done my O-levels, done okay at O-level by complete fluke, not by doing any hard work, because I wasn't really interested in school. So I was packed off back to sixth form, at the same school I did my O-levels. They had a sixth form. made a complete mess of my A-levels, came out at 18 with one A-level.
Why?
It was still felt like school. We weren't wearing uniform, but we were still part of Honley High School, which is where I went to school. And I wasn't really that interested in the subjects, even though I chose them. So yeah, I was distracted by other things. I got into motorbikes. I discovered a love of beer. And school, we spent most of our time bunking off school on one of the bikes to go to the local pub. Didn't drink anything, obviously. But,
Of course not, Mr. Hobson, of course not.
Definitely not.
So in the olden days, as I say, because you and I are the same age, more or less, give or take a few months or a couple of years, there used to be these wonderful things called career officers. In my school, it was provided by the school. Did you ever deal with a careers officer?
I did. I had a wonderful careers officer. She wasn't part of the school. She was a fully employed local authority careers officer called Miss Sweeney. I first met her when I was 16. She got me the interview with the Royal Navy, and she must be in mid-20s, which when you're 16 she was, very attractive lady, let's put it that way, and she made a big impression on me. And I don't know how quickly we want to move forward, but I bumped into Miss Sweeney many times after that.
So you went into the Merchant Navy.
She got me the job. I failed my A-levels. I went to see her at 16, said I wanted to join the Royal Navy, so she organised that for me. I failed, was packed off back to sixth form, came out 18 with one A-level, went back to see Miss Sweeney, and she went, well, you went for the Royal Navy, did you fancy trying the Merchant Navy? Which I didn't really know much about. Most people in this country don't know what the Merchant Navy is.
Don't.
They're like trucks, but they're on the sea. They carry stuff, just about everything. I mean, people say whatever we get in this country is covered in the back of a truck. Well, it's almost certainly arrived in the UK on a ship, unless it's very high value, which it might come in a 747. So she said, it just happens today that a company called Bibby Line, the shipping company, not Bibby Distribution, as we probably know in this industry, are looking for A-level entry cadets, deck cadets. And they're interviewing today. Would you like an interview? So I said, yeah, why not? I'll give it a go. So she wrote out a little rail voucher. I went down to Huddersfield Station, went to Liverpool.
So you didn't even have to pay for the travel for the interview?
No. That was the best.
That's how life was in those days, Steve.
Was in those days. Free everything.
So they took you in?
Yeah, I went down, had the interview with an ex-artillery officer who had half his head blown off and a shell went off in one war. He was quite an intimidating bloke. But he let me in. He gave a chance, and he gave me a chance. And so, yes, I joined the Bibby Line. Spent 4 years training to be a deck officer. Got my third mate's ticket. Well, it's second mate's ticket. They always do a ticket in advance. No one does, even though there are three mates, first, second, and third mate, no one does a third mate's ticket. It doesn't exist. You all do your second mates, then you get a job as a third officer. And then you do your mate's ticket, and then you get a job as a second officer. So, yes, I went to Liverpool. I went to Warsash College in Southampton, got my deck officer certificate, did one trip as third officer. Age 22, decided the Merchant Navy wasn't for me.
So how long have you been in there? 4 years?
4 years. That's how long it takes to get your first ticket.
Okay. So what did you do?
I went back to see Miss Sweeney.
You went back to see Miss Sweeney, that important figure in your life.
She played a very big role in my life, Miss Sweeney, I have to say. She's a very impressive lady. And I said, Miss Sweeney, thanks for getting me into the Merchant Navy. I've done it 4 years now, I don't need any more. What can I do? And that was time the UK was going through a recession. The Merchant Navy wasn't immune.
This would be in the early 80s, I guess.
Early 80s, yes. The British flag fleet was shrinking. There were lots of people made redundant. I said, good time to get out. Unfortunately, there aren't many jobs ashore either. Why don't you go and do a degree? Get some more qualifications, 3 years, things might have picked up a little bit. With a degree in your hand, job market be better, you'll be lots of options. So she packed me off to Liverpool Polytechnic to do
now John Moores University.
Now John Moores University, indeed. But at the time, it was just plain old Liverpool Poly. And I did my maritime studies degree, which is like a business studies degree, but a bit of
ships.
For shipping. And came out of there with my 2-1. Sorry.
It's all right, you're showing off. It's okay. I don't mind.
I wouldn't have mentioned that.
I can live with it.
Except that you made a big deal of it, so I thought I'd drop it in the conversation. And guess where I went then? Back to Miss
Sweeney.
Right, I got my degree.
Did you enjoy your degree?
No, I would say I enjoyed it. The thing about it is, there was lots, that course, when we started out, there were about 35 mainly men on the course, mainly ex-merchant marine who had lost their jobs in the recession. There were 6 A-level students who wanted to study. I think they all wanted to join either the Royal or Merchant Navy and couldn't get in. So to their mind, the next best thing was to do a maritime studies degree. So there were 6 18-year-olds and about 30 middle-aged blokes
And you somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I was somewhere in the middle. I was 22, so
Yeah.
I hadn't been
Yeah.
in the merchant navy for 4 years
Yeah.
like some of these guys. I've got to say, the first 6 months, most of the middle-aged blokes couldn't hack it, and they left. So I think about 20 of us finished the course. It was interesting in a way. We had lots of time on our hands, spent a lot of time in the pub, which was good. Don't know how I managed to scrape a 2-1.
Part of university life, because so many people these days go to university, don't they, to do a degree, quite frankly, whether they need it or not, as opposed to doing, for example, an apprenticeship. Whereas in those days, not so many people did degrees.
Well, no, I'd already done the course I did in the merchant navy was called an apprenticeship. We were called cadets, not
Yes, so you've done
apprentices.
both.
But it was a 3-year apprenticeship. So
Yeah.
I'd done my apprenticeship. Still couldn't get a job ashore because the jobs I was looking for, things like ship management, port management, the marine insurance market, and they wanted graduates, which is why Miss Sweeney sent me off to get my degree.
So when you got your degree, what did you do, Steve?
Couldn't find a job. So while I was studying, I spent my summer holidays and Christmas holidays tramping around the UK coast and small coasters. And I'd gone back to doing that job after I finished my degree because 6 weeks, the only time in my life I ever signed on, 6 weeks, because you had to do something. You couldn't disappear from the records. So I was sent to sign on. I had a big BMW motorbike and I used to pull up at the Dole office once a fortnight to sign on. And after 6 weeks of that, I thought, this is rubbish. So I went back to coasting. And while I was pulled up in an East Coast port somewhere, the phone went in the agent's office and I got called down to the phone. And it wasn't Miss Sweeney, it was a lecturer at Liverpool Poly who said to me, Steve, said, your dissertation wasn't the best bit of research I've ever read, but it was reasonably well written. Have you thought about writing for a living? I was like, no, not at all. I hadn't got an English A-level or English degree, anything like that. My one A-level was in physics. But he said, well, I've got a friend of mine who runs a magazine about shipping called Fair Play in London. London immediately rang alarm bells. I don't want to work in London.
I'm a northerner. I don't want to go to London.
The smoke, thank you very much.
Absolutely.
But I was sitting there covered in wheat dust. We were discharging wheat somewhere on the East Coast. And I was thinking, well, I can give it a go. If I don't like it, I can always come back to the ships, So I said, yeah, all right, I'll give it a go. So, yeah, I went off down to London to work on Fair Play magazine, which is a weekly magazine about shipping. John Prime.
Why was it called Fair Play?
That's a
sounds like a golfing magazine
question.
to me.
Right, okay. I'll try and keep this brief because we don't want to get distracted in shipping.
Keep it brief.
Keep it brief. It was launched at the time when ships were just really changing from wind to steam. And there was the power was in the hands of the cargo owners, the shippers.
From wind to steam?
Ships.
Right.
There used to be wind. Like
Yes.
Like
So it was launched a very, very long time ago.
Very long time ago, even long before motor transport was invented. A very old magazine.
Right.
But all the power was in the cargo owners' hands. And they used to regularly overload the ships. The Plimsoll line was invented around about that time, which was a mark on the ship where you couldn't, if that went below, the ship was full, it had to go, even though the cargo guys go, you get a few tons on there.
Absolutely. And
it was called Fair Play because it was designed to promote fair play between the ship owners and
fair
the cargo
competition.
shippers.
Thus it ever was, compliance and fair competition,
Exactly.
inextricably linked.
Exactly. So that's how it got its name. So I went to work as a reporter on Fair Play magazine, my first ever job, no journalism training at all, knew a little bit about shipping from the sharp end, and that's how I got started.
So how did you then go into commercial vehicles?
Well, serendipitously, John Prime, who owned Fair Play, he wanted to diversify a little bit, and he bought a magazine called Headlight, which was a truck driver's magazine. And
some of our listeners will remember.
Hopefully some will remember it. It was quite well known 30 odd years ago. And they were looking for a deputy editor. So as I've done throughout my career, really, you move sideways to move up. So I went from being a reporter on Fair Play to being deputy editor on Headlight. I don't know if any of our readers remember the editor of Headlight, Bob Scott, very interesting Scottish gentleman who was quite a character, taught me a lot, especially about how to work your expenses. So, I went to be a deputy editor on Headlight, and I was there about 18 months, I think, going out to various press conferences. And I got a phone call from Mary Frayne, who was editor at My Transport at the time, saying we're looking for a reporter. I've heard pretty good reports about, do you want to come and work for Motor Transport? And that's how I first started working at the Big Beast, which was read Business Information at the time, which owned a lot of magazines, and that's how I got in.
And that was a long time ago.
Many years. You probably got the date written down because we've just discussed it, but
I think it was in our introduction,
can't remember.
1989.
1989, yeah, that's when I first started.
A long time. In that time, you will have seen so many changes, and you've had the opportunity to write about those changes and to interview people about those changes. One of the things that we talked about in the introduction is the Motor Transport Awards, which is celebrating what's great in the industry. But it's a celebration by the industry for the industry. What's your view about the great British public and how they regard the commercial vehicle industry?
I would say they just completely ignore it, treat it with complete disdain. They just see big truck. I'm going to say noisy trucks, but they're not noisy anymore. But they're big trucks which just get in the way, and they don't appreciate the industry. In my career, between working as a motor transport as reporter, coming back as editor, I worked in different industries, covered different industries, utilities, construction. And I would say the sewage treatment industry is probably even more invisible and treated with even greater disdain by the public, but it is probably even more essential than logistics. Because if you flush the toilet and what's in there doesn't go, you're going to get very unhappy. So logistics is not the only underappreciated, ignored, undervalued industry, but it is certainly one of them.
But it's those essential services, isn't it, that people absolutely take for granted until it's not there anymore. You'll have met some big characters in the industry, whether that's at the Motor Transport Awards or whether it's going out and interviewing people. At the awards, there's always a celeb who is presenting. What do they know about the industry when they're asked, will you come and present? Do they say, what on earth's that? Because I remember many years ago, Ruby Wax spoke as the entertainment at the, as it then was, Freight Transport Awards, and she thought she was speaking to truckers. And it actually made the national press.
Really?
What about the celebs that come to do Motor Transport Awards?
It varies a lot. Some, I'll mention a few names. Michael McIntyre came along to the sponsors reception. He had a briefing on the phone with me before the event, so we told him, don't call them truckers, and he got that. He came along and spoke to quite a few of the guests and the sponsors before he went on. And one of his best gags was, so I understand that all the trucks are limited to 56 miles an hour. So the audience goes, yes. So why the F are they overtaking each other on a dual carriageway? Taking half an hour to get past each other because we're all going at the same speed. And he got a great laugh because he made the effort to understand a little bit about the industry. I would say majority of them want to know a little bit about the orders because they don't want to go out and make fools of themselves. And
of course, Alan Dedicoat, who people know as Voice of the Balls and was on Joe Wogan, he makes a major contribution, doesn't he?
Absolutely fantastic. I can't remember exactly when we first hired him, but he was just perfect. So we've kept him on. It must be 10 years now. He's been the voice of God, as we call it, and he knows most of the celebrities, so he can have a little bit of banter with them, which always goes down well.
Absolutely, and I think he's very good at that. Can we just talk a moment about journalism in terms of not the awards and celebrating what's good, but looking at that mix of good and bad, mediocre and excellent? What's your view on how credible journalism, the written word, whether that is sent by a newsletter email or whether it is a printed magazine, against social media, all of that instant information or misinformation that's available? What's your take on that, having worked at motor transport since '89?
Well, I don't want to sound like an old dinosaur, but the internet has ruined print journalism. When I joined motor transport the first time, basically print magazines were the only way to reach a market. It was their main source of information. I mean, the national media didn't really care about transport. Some of the nationals, the Sunday Times had a transport correspondent who would sometimes talk about freight transport, but mainly, if you were working in the industry, your main source of information was reading the trade press, as people call it. I don't call it the trade press, we call it B2B, but that's what people call it.
I call it the trade press,
It is a trade press, so I mean, okay, I'm not going to be proud about it, it is, but it mattered. What we wrote actually mattered. People cared about what we wrote, because we were their only source of information, credible information. When the internet came along and every was a journalist. Everyone could have their own media channels, and information became free. Now, most things which are free aren't worth having, in my view. I'm shooting myself in the foot slightly there because motor transport did become a free publication because we had commercial motor in the same
So how do you
stable.
marry those two comments, Steve?
Because it was a give and get model. We used to insist that people gave us some of their data about their business.
Oh, I see, right.
So we used to trade rather than take money off them. We used to get them to give us data, and that is how we launched many products using the data we gathered. And so it was a give and get model. But it was still written by qualified journalists. It wasn't, when I say it was like a free newspaper which comes to the letterbox on a Thursday and it's all PA, very few proper journalists. But the internet, what I'm saying is, it became a free-for-all, and it became very, very difficult to continue to make money out of in-depth quality journalism in print, because all of a sudden everything was everywhere, and it's become a real challenge. When I look back at motor transport, we had 8 full-time journalists when I joined it. There's 2 of us left now.
And it's not just the printed word, is it? It's the speed at which news changes and the speed at which news reaches the people. Because I still have a printed daily newspaper. I read the Times, don't you know? Whereas my parents read the Telegraph. Now, of course, by the time that Times newspaper lands on my doormat, events will have moved on. And I'm old-fashioned and I still like to read it. So how does motor transport keep up to date with things that are changing in the transport world for your readers?
Well, we have a website, and we have a newsletter.
But do people use it?
Yes, that's the thing. Our online audience now, through the digital version of the magazine and the website, is 6 times greater than the print circulation. It's interesting, the difference between online and print, because someone once said to me very early in the days of online, people aren't going to read a 1,600 word analysis piece looking at all the issues in depth online. Print is for inspiration, websites are for information. If you want to Google something and find information on something, you wouldn't have a shelf full of magazines. Well, people did. You go to people's offices and they had all the back issues of MT. Yes. And they were thinking, oh God, I read something in MT 6 months ago. And they would, now you just Google it, you would just look for the information on the website. But people don't sit down and read very long, in-depth articles, which is why I still see people on trains reading papers and magazines, because it's more about the things you don't know you didn't know that you might find in a magazine, whereas if you have to search for everything online, you're only going to find the stuff you know you want to find.
And that's a really valid point, because in a magazine or a newspaper that's printed, or even a digital version, get the Times on my iPad, it will take you to things that you don't know about, and you enhance your learning and your knowledge and your information.
Yes. The beauty of motor transport in the print version is if someone picks it up, even if they flick through it in 15 minutes, they know that they're not going to miss anything big. Whereas if there's so much information coming out of the internet, unless you are very clever at setting filters on your feeds, you might miss something really important.
And misinformation. Are you going to be replaced by ChatGPT?
Yes, that's
I
another
don't even know
reason.
whether it's GPT or GBT, but there we go.
It's GPT.
GPT.
That's the internet was one thing which sent the industry downhill. AI is going to finish it off.
Or assist it. So what for you does excellence look like in an operator? And I'm looking at that whole sphere of excellence, not just compliance, not just customer service, not just cost. And I know you have your awards with different categories, but with all your years of experience, what does excellence look like? I don't want a name, I want a concept.
I'm not going to give any names.
No.
I'm going to use a word which I know you hate, Beverley.
Oh.
Passion.
Right, okay. Well, I like passion, but in the right context.
Well, in the context of transport companies, it's what shines through. When I meet the award winners, none of them get to be an award winner unless they really care about the operation. And it's one of the great privileges of my life to go out and interview these people who are very good at what they do, really care about what they do, and make money at it. That they work so hard. That's the other thing. I can't tell you how much I admire about this industry. They work they put in. It's 24/7.
Oh, for sure.
And even if you're the MD of a very large multi-million-pound company, they'll still be down the yard at 5 o'clock in the morning making sure the trucks get out, because that's what they care about. That's what they've been brought up with. And I'm so glad that before I finally hang up my quill, I've got to meet some of these people, because I think the next bunch of people coming through are going to be private equity, the accountants, the bean counters are only going to get into it
clue.
because they see, a very successful transport companies making an 8% margin. Oh, that's nice and easy. We'll have a bit of that. And then 2 years, it's all gone sour because they don't have the person with the passion, the interest, the enthusiasm, the knowledge. And that's what this industry is going to lose eventually because it's getting very hard. It's getting very hard.
Well, it's always been hard, and I would agree with you that once the bean counters start to run the companies, it's very different. But we always have this phrase, don't we? The big boys. There's a couple of phrases that I've lived with for a long time: the big boys and the cowboys, or the rogues, and the small operators. And in my old role, I used to say in the Bell household, big isn't necessarily beautiful. There's always been this perception that big companies are somehow more compliant, whereas not necessarily a small family company, an SME, has to do a good job for the right price because otherwise the business will fold. And we all know that there are lots of businesses folding at the moment, and it's heartbreaking for those people that have run those businesses. So for you, what does excellence look like in that size company? Is it the same? Is it the same that you've just said for the big boys, the people with the passion, the commitment, the 5 a.m. in the morning getting up?
Absolutely. It's interesting now looking at, because a lot of these companies are third generation. They were founded after the war. They always say the grandfather founds it, the father makes it, and the grandson pisses it away.
Yes, and there's no mention of grandmothers, mothers. Oh, no, I'm teasing you. Teasing you, or daughters. But often they are family companies where what was the grandfather and the grandmother together.
Yes.
But because it's a male-dominated industry, grandfather's front of house.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of haulage companies I've discovered over the years were founded because, let's say, the father had a farm.
Yes.
3 sons. He decided, when he's hanging his hat up, he's going to divide the farm into 3.
Yes.
And the farm gets so small he can't make money to it. So one of the sons, generally speaking, becomes a haulier, uses his patch of land. I interviewed a third generation haulier, and he said, the only successful companies around here got free land. If we had to go out and buy,
for sure,
what was in the old days grade A farmland to run a haulage company, we've stuffed. And most of us, in my little circle, inherited a bit of land from our fathers, and that's how we got our transport yard. But it's people I get to see. I don't go and see the failures. No one rings me and says, Steve, third generation, we're going down the toilet, come along and I'll tell you all about it. They just don't. So I only get to see the best of the industry.
Is that because people don't like a bad news story? Or is it because there's no value in it for you?
No, there's plenty of value in it for me. I would love to interview.
Or it's distressing for them?
Yeah, why would they want to wash their failure in public? It's awful. As you say, it's a nightmare. I feel the heart goes out to them. And it's not going to get any easier. We haven't mentioned net zero yet, but this transition is going to add another twist to the pain of running a transport company.
Have you ever thought of going into politics?
Never. I hate politicians. The last politicians I had any respect for, I'm not political at all. I'm going to make a terrible confession now, is that when I turned 18, I was in the Merchant Navy and I got out of the habit of voting. I've never voted.
Okay.
A lot of people despise me for saying that. My grandfather fought in a war.
Despise you, but
my grandfather fought in the war for you to have the right to vote, and I think Australia, that it's compulsory to vote, which I do get
that's
that.
an interesting concept.
I think so. So the last politicians I was interested in were Thatcher and Kinnock because they actually cared. These days, ever since Tony Blair, you could interchange them from Liberal, Tory, Labour, and they're career politicians. They've got no beliefs. They've got no fundamental. You've got to see this Labour government to see what a mess and how unprincipled they are. They only did and promised what they promised to get into power.
Okay, so I can hear people shouting at the podcast now.
Good.
And no, that's good. And I don't do politics, never have done. Obviously, in my previous role, I couldn't, and I wouldn't want to do it now. I've had enough political arguments with my father. But let's just look at the role of transport in government, because the Department for Transport is not seen as a key department. Do you think it should be? When you think of the role it plays in literally keeping Great Britain going.
Well, obviously, yes, I would love to see the Transport Secretary have a bit more influence and then perhaps last a bit longer, because it's a revolving door, always has been. It's for us people on the rise. You do a reasonable job, you get promoted, or it's people who have done a bad job, stick them in transport. It used to be Northern Ireland office, used to be the place where
Yes.
bad politicians were sent. Fortunately, now it's a transport department. And when you talk about transport to politicians, I go to quite a few think tank events. Most politicians, transport is buses and trains.
Yes.
Most of them wouldn't have a clue how many wheels on a lorry, which is one of your fundamental questions you ask people.
It is one of my fundamental questions.
But that's because that's the industry's fault, because they do such a great job. It never goes wrong, so why would you worry about it?
So I often quote Joan Aitken, who, as you know, was the TC for Scotland, and we are, she calls me my wee pal, and she talks about...
She's got a nerve.
Well, I could be her wee pal. Got a lot of time for Joan. She talks about the invisibility of success.
Yes, exactly.
The good news stories. Who likes good news stories? Some people do, some people don't. People don't say, oh, look, I mean, I have this reputation for not liking the commercial vehicle industry with some people, basically the ones that I've taken out of it. But for ones that actually know me, they realise that I am the greatest fan. And when my children were little and I used to see an Arctic reversing in with this much either side, I go, children, let's stop and look at that. And they go, oh, for God's sake, mother. And I used to drive along going, oh, there's a recovery truck. It's exempt from operational licensing and tachographs. And I'd say we'd play it as a game.
God, I bet the winter nights flew by in your house.
And one's a designer, one's a maths teacher. But the point I'm making is that people don't think about the industry. They just take it for granted.
Yes.
So in terms of covering stories, on the basis that we still have stories in your publication, what are the ones that you like covering the most?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, there's a sort of trite saying in journalism that good news doesn't sell. And that is true to a certain extent. And unfortunately, as you say, there's been a lot of bad news recently, which is making the front page, which is administrations, companies being taken over.
Heartbreaking.
It is heartbreaking. As I say, people selling out to private equity and they've been doing the thing for 3 generations. It's not what I want to hear. I suppose a good news story, if we could get an exclusive on, a government minister had actually taken a bit of notice of freight transport and was going to have a weight increase to 48 tonne, maybe on limited trunk routes, actually give the industry a little bit of breathing space. If I could get a scoop on that, that would be the best read story in the transport industry for months.
And if you were given 3 minutes in the lift, the elevator pitch, and you got in and Heidi Alexander got in.
Who's she? Well, Transport Secretary, this week.
Very funny. Well, I used to say in my old job, Secretaries of State for Transport come and go, but traffic commissioners tend to be there for a bit longer. What would your pitch to her be in that elevator pitch?
Just wake up and just realise that if this industry starts to fail at a massive basis, which it might do if they carry on with this ludicrous timescale for phasing out diesel trucks, people won't eat, people will not drink their water, they will not have toilet roll. The health service will fall over because road freight transport is literally the lifeblood. And if you just ignore it, on your watch, it might struggle. So
what do you think about alternative fuels and autonomous vehicles and, carbon neutral and all that?
I'm tempted to say pass on that one, because if you start me on that, we'll be here all day. Climate change is obviously a very important thing.
Yeah, but it's an emotive subject.
I was listening to the news the other day, and it's almost certain now we're going to hit 2.5 or 2.8 degrees rise. The old 1.8, 1.5 alive is gone. It's almost time to stop worrying about the causes of it, because it's done. The carbon's out there.
Yes.
We've got to really focus
bolted.
Yes, it's bolted. We've got to start thinking about mitigation. What's going to happen to this country? How can we develop some resilience? Because the floods, the storms, the droughts, unless we sort ourselves out, we just constantly focus on hitting the industry over the head to say go electric. Well, it won't matter, because the roads will be flooded, and the farms will, there's no food to move around, because we sleepwalk into a disaster. And while the industry knows it has to decarbonise, the margins aren't there to invest all the money in not just the vehicles. People focus on the vehicles. It's not the vehicles. It's the charging infrastructure.
Infrastructure is the key.
And while the grid keeps telling me, yes, the grid will be carbon free by 2030, 2035, whatever. There's lots of small wires, the low voltage, medium voltage networks, who are just not going to be ready to move all that energy from the wind farms offshore into Fred Bloggs' haulage yard somewhere in the middle of Worcester. It just isn't going to happen. And I just wish people would realise that bashing people over the head and saying you can't buy a diesel truck after 2035 is not solving the problem of how am I going to charge the electric vehicle you want me to buy? Because it's out of their hands. It's so wrong. It's wrong.
So maybe that will be your elevator pitch to the Transport Secretary.
Well, it's all the Transport Secretary. Well, go talk to the Department of Energy. It's nothing to do with me, mate. You talk about fuel duty. Go and talk to the Treasury. Well, they're not listening. So every time you try and talk to the transport people, it's like, well, fuel duty is Treasury, energy is energy. What can I do?
Okay. Completely different question now. Being an editor can be a bit of a lonely job. Do you have a phone a friend, a mentor, somebody that when you want a second opinion, you don't have to say who it is, you can go to and say, what do you think?
Well, I can't say who it is because I don't have one.
You don't have one at all?
No, it is the loneliest job because the book stops with you. There's a problem, the editor goes to prison. You know, that's the law, that's the fact. So, no. Part of the problem is, in COVID, we all started working from home and very few of us went back. So the old team ethic where you could sit around and have a team meeting once a week like we used to in the good old days and discuss things is gone. I sit in my office at home and I just have to get on with it.
So you don't see that as a good thing?
No, it is lonely. I think a lot of people, I think Britain has got a lot lonelier over the years. It's a bit of an epidemic, I would say, actually. And I think the working from home thing, yeah, it's brilliant that I don't have to drive an hour and a half up the A24 to the office anymore. Don't get me wrong, I wanted that. But yeah, it is difficult sometimes because you don't have anybody you could really say, I'm not sure about this, what do you think? It's tricky.
But has it always been like that?
No, as I said, when we all work together in the office...
No, I mean for you as an editor, in terms of not having a mentor or somebody to...
No. As I said, when I first started as editor, 17 years ago, whatever it was, we were all in the office every day. It was, I think it was still weekly at the time. We had six people on the editorial team. We were all in the office. We had meetings and we could bounce ideas off each other and had a deputy that I could talk to about, stuff. So the industry's changed so much. It's changed a lot, and it's not as good as it was. Like many things in life.
Well, absolutely. And we're going to run out of time shortly, but can I just ask you about education and training? In times of plenty, people go, yes, of course you can go on a training course, no problem at all. We all know how tight the margins are. Our listeners will know. They'll be shouting at the podcast again, going, oh, I know, And so it's easy to say, well, we'll make some cuts. We'll see if we can get rid of some drivers. We'll see if we can rationalise the fleet. We'll stop training. We'll stop education. It'll all be fine. What's your view on the importance of training and education, not just to drivers, but right across the sector? Because, you've got some professional organisations that are excellent at saying you can't progress up the industry unless you've got a certain level of qualification. That, whilst you've got CILT, and I'm a vice president of CILT, none of that exists. You can just go and, a man and boy or whatever. What's your take on that in terms of education and training and qualifications?
Okay, well, I've got to say the first thing is, I think the driver CPC was the biggest missed opportunity ever.
I agree with you.
35 hours classroom-based training for drivers who are out on the road all day on their own. Ooh, what a disgrace. Absolute disgrace. Waste of money.
Yeah, I completely agree with you.
Apprenticeship levy as it was.
Well, what would you replace it with?
Moving on to that, Beverley.
Okay.
Let me set the background.
Yeah.
There have been attempts, like driver CPC, like the apprenticeship levy, to make people train by saying, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And I think they've just failed, completely failed. Everyone I talk to says the apprenticeship levy, I think it's changed its name now, but it's still a levy. It was a tax. It's a tax because if you want to train, the biggest skill shortages are your warehousemen and your drivers. And then a year-long apprenticeship is not the right way to train those people. So most people just regarded it. The only company I know does really well, what's the name? They use most of their apprenticeship levy to do degree level 7 apprenticeships. And that's how they get the money back, because they train their managers. They don't train drivers, they train their managers. And it's a good way to do it. But for a lot of companies, if you employ 3 people in the office, you can't put them all through level 7 apprenticeships. It doesn't work. This is going to be quite controversial now in a way, because in the old days, there used to be a training levy. The RTITB used to collect a training levy, and you could claim that money back to do any kind of training. And I think, obviously, a lot of people are going to shout the thing now, saying we don't want more levies, we don't need levies. But what this industry lacks is a cohesive approach to training its workers. As you say, there are some very good, shining examples, but it's very piecemeal. I go and see a lot of operators, because as I said, I go and see the good ones. Oh yeah, we've got a driver academy, we've got warehouse to wheels, 6 of our drivers, we brought them up ourselves. But by and large, the industry expects some person to go out there, spend 1,500 quid getting their HGV licence, and then banging on doors trying to get some experience. There's no overall strategy. If you want to become a nurse, there's a clear path to becoming a nurse.
Yes.
You want to become a transport manager, maybe start as a driver, work your way up, come in the office. There's no structure. There is no career path. It's a job. And, a lot of drivers become drivers, and they realise the best they're going to get is a driver instructor, and they leave.
And often, and back to Miss Sweeney, a lot of drivers become drivers because all maintenance staff, because the careers officers will say, oh, you can't do anything else, you can become a driver or you can become a mechanic. Yes?
I couldn't comment. I've never been told that by a careers advisor. I was told to go in the Merchant Navy.
Yes, but just generally in terms of, because the work that I did with what's now Generation Logistics, that was Think Logistics, with the lovely Steve Granite from Abbey Logistics, who kicked it all off. The careers advisors are not the best advocates and ambassadors for the transport industry. It's like, go work in transport because you can't do anything else.
Yes. Well, actually, do you know what? I think if the careers advice were telling people to go and become a truck driver, I think that'd be brilliant. I just don't think they even think of it. There's a very funny joke. We had Mickey Flanagan do the MT Awards once, and he told a very funny story about when they were going around the classroom, when the careers guy came into the classroom, and he was brought up in quite a deprived area in London, I believe. And he was going around, and he said, well, what do you do when you leave school? He said, I want to be a van driver. And the whole class went, the van driver, the best anyone from this school has been the guy who loads the van. Being a van driver, you're mad. You're mad. You're never going to achieve that. And you think, yeah, that's probably true. A lot of people wouldn't even dream of becoming a van driver.
That's interesting.
It's not something on their radar, is it? No one wakes up in the morning and goes, God, I'd love to work for Amazon.
Yes, well, yes,
Ooh,
that's
other parcel
true.
companies are available.
Yeah, other parcels companies are available. So I've asked you lots of questions and you give me lots of lovely long answers. Thank you. It's your opportunity. Voluntary, you don't have to if you want to turn the tables and ask me any questions.
Well, you sort of answered my question in an earlier question. You talking about the big guys are necessarily the best. So I was curious to know, if I was interviewing you, I would love to know, in your time as traffic commissioner, who were the worst rogues you came across? Were they some of the bigger fleets that we assume are gold-plated, or was it some of the smaller family firms who were struggling for obvious reasons?
So I would first of all tackle you on the word rogues, because I would say that the rogues are the top 2%, 2 to 5%. And I'll talk to you about one of them in a moment. I would say, as I said before, that in the Bell household, big isn't beautiful. My experience was, and in this current role, is that there are many large operators who think they're far better than they actually are. And the small and medium-sized enterprises do a great job. They're compliant, they're great customer service. They're the invisibility of success. So I think some of the large companies need to take a look at themselves sometimes. The ones that sort of stick out in your mind are the ones that are, to quote somebody, an unremitting charlatan with a knife at the main chance. And they tend to be individuals. And they're always colourful characters. And they will never take no for an answer. And they were such fun to regulate. One of whom some people have heard me talk about, called Mr. Yellow Jumper. I won't tell you his name. He had his licence revoked, so he set up a front, had that licence revoked. Then he ran without a licence, so DVSA impounded him, and I said, hello, Mr. Yellow Jumper, it's me again. Can I have my lorry back, Mrs. Belt? No. So then he sent his wife, Could she have a licence? No. And then he finished with saying, here's my childhood sweetheart who I've met on Friends Reunited, and she suddenly wants to run trucks. She didn't get a licence either. So in the end, I said to Mr. Yellowjumper, just apply to remove your disqualification, which he did. And I thought, my God, I'm going to have to give him a licence because he's answered all the questions properly, until I asked him the last one. And he got it wrong. And that was, after how many days driving must you have a daily rest period? And he got it wrong. I thought, yes, application refused, Mr. Yellowjumper. And he's now living very happily in Spain, as I know, and making a very healthy living. Did I do the right thing by keeping him out? Yes, I did, because fair competition is what's important. So some colourful characters. So our time is up. I'm going to thank you very much indeed for joining us, and it's been lovely to meet the man behind the news. Thank you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Beverley. I'm always flattered when anyone thinks I've got anything interesting to say, so thank you. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thank you.
As we conclude another fascinating journey through the world of transport and logistics, we want to express our sincere appreciation for listening. Your support means the world to us. Keep the conversation going by reaching out on social media with your questions and feedback. We're eager to hear from you and continue exploring together. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and check out our other episodes online. Take care on the roads, and see you in the next episode.